Welcome, everybody, to the first day of the Healing Trauma Summit. We're going to have an exciting 8 days with 8 experts across the next 8 days. So I'm really happy that we can give this to you for free as something that they can share their wisdom with you. And I'm really glad you're joining us. And I hope that you can make it to all of the 8 presentations. We do open them for 12 hours so that everybody around the world get a chance to have access. And by the way, I'm Diane Poole-Heller. You might know me from teaching somatic experiencing and also for creating the attachment work called DARE, Dynamic Attachment Patterning Experience. We do live trainings. We do online trainings like Attachment Mastery Program and our monthly Therapy Mastermind Circle for therapists to come together to really dig in and share all the wisdoms we bring to these different topics that we explore. And this time, we're really working with adding this Healing Trauma Summit where we have the 8 days really focused on the treatment of trauma from many different windows. So I know you're going to enjoy all these amazing people that are going to be on the program. Today, of course, you're going to hear from Dr. Richard Schwartz, who's created the Internal Family Systems Model. And he's also the founder of the Center for Self-Leadership. And self is sort of what he finds is we all can access a sort of essential part of ourselves that can help all these different parts of us that are normal to occur, these different parts that hold trauma or protect us from the wound of trauma or interact in certain ways, that all of these parts have a positive function, and we're trying to help the healing happen with those that are still holding a wound so that maybe they can get a new assignment that takes them into deeper creativity or something a lot more fun than holding a wound and protecting it. So now, before we start, I just want to say a little bit about the special offer where you can receive the Healing Trauma Lifetime Access Package. Like you may or may not have time to make them all live every day, but this would give you the whole package where you get the presentations, listen to them later. You can also purchase the talks through the upgrade option. This gives you, again, a lifetime access to all of the trainings that include over 8 hours of downloadable material, videos, audios, and then we give you the transcripts for those as well. I really like having the transcripts because I like to scribble notes, and it helps me remember. I don't have to go searching on the video or audio to find it again. But you'll have that as a reference in the future if you would decide you want to do that. Plus, we have all of the presenters giving you 2 additional bonuses of really great material that they put together that's kind of cutting edge ideas and can include that. So that gives you another 16 bonuses, includes videos or audios or articles they've written or book chapters from books they've published. So it's really a lot of rich material in addition to the presentation. So you'll kind of get a sense when you hear people what you might want to dig into more. And the upgrade option gives you all of that. Plus 2 bonuses from me. One's several tracks from the Disorganized Attachment chapter on my audiobook called Healing Your Attachment Wounds. That was published by Sounds True. And then also I'm going to provide video and audio on working with trauma and spirituality and kind of understanding the two and how they might interface. And sometimes when we're fractured from trauma, we actually get more access to spirituality, but then we have the challenge of integrating it into our body. So we'll be talking about that a bit. Now, remember, during the summit, if you enroll, you can get 50% savings. So it's $197 during the summit, and it goes up to $397 afterwards. So we'd like you to enroll during the summit so you can save the $200 if it's something that fits for you or it's valuable information for you to keep forever. We also have a payment plan if that makes it easier, so you can break up the payments. And again, you can get the lifetime package just by clicking the button on this page to own the minimum of 8 hours of training material, the transcripts, the 18 bonuses. Now, let's jump in. Let's introduce our speaker today, Dr. Richard Schwartz. Dick and I bump into each other at conferences all the time. We've had some great lunchtime conversations about all these different ways of approaching trauma, and he does a wealth of knowledge, so I'm just thrilled that he's here. Dick began his career as a family therapist and an academic at the University of Illinois. There he discovered family therapy alone just wasn't cutting it. He didn't quite understand why it was missing the mark because it sounded so good. So he started interviewing his clients and asking them, why isn't this working for you? And I said, well, we have all these parts and we're plagued with them. And these parts then became sort of mentors or teachers for Dick as he listened to them, and they described how their parts kind of form networks, kind of like sitting around the family table, but different voices and different aspects of ourselves, which is normal for us all to have as humans. And that there was this sort of represented these different aspects of one's consciousness or one's awareness or one's way of relating to the world. Some parts are wounded, some parts are protecting. There's all sorts of roles that the different parts take on, and that Dick will be explaining to us very articulately in just a moment. He also found that as they focused on the separate parts, they would start to shift into a state that was characterized by qualities like curiosity, calmness, courage, confidence, compassion, this kind of a higher expanded awareness that he calls self with a capital S, and that this was something that freed us so much from our different problems, but was helped us. He actually was very important for facilitating the healing process. And so with all this happening, he found that it worked really well with even complex diagnoses and all sorts of different trauma possibilities and all sorts of different situations. And the IFS, Internal Family System Model, was born in the early 1980s. IFS is now evidence-based and has become a widely used form of psychotherapy, particularly with trauma. It provides a non-pathologizing, optimistic, and empowering perspective and practical and effective sets of techniques for working with individuals, couples, families, and more recently, corporations and classrooms. So it really has a wide application. This is why I really wanted to make sure we had this piece on the program, because I think it's so valuable. And in 2013, Dick left the Chicago area and now lives in Brookline, Massachusetts, where he's on the faculty for the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. Hi, welcome, Dick. We're so thankful that you're here. Yay. Everybody's waiting patiently to hear you talk. So I just want to again, appreciate so much you taking the time to be part of the program. And I want to get into your presentation where you can present your talk on internal family systems and working with trauma and also creating different treatment strategies to work with parts.
So IFS offers a bit of a different perspective, a different paradigm for understanding trauma and working with it. One of the differences is in the idea that our minds are naturally multiple, that parts aren't the product of trauma, which a lot of systems think they are.
That was certainly how I was taught in the beginning, so you've certainly opened my eyes to that.
Thank you. So when you think of that as people have one mind, and then the trauma fragments them, then the idea is that parts are basically the product of trauma, that they're pathological. But if instead, from the IFS perspective, you believe, as I do, that we come into the world with parts, that it's actually a very good thing to have these little subpersonalities, each of which has a lot of different talents and resources for us, but that trauma has a way of forcing them into roles that they're not equipped to handle, and it makes us lock up other parts that get hurt. Then it is, like I say, it's a very different perspective on how to work with them. And so instead of trying to manage them, especially the ones that give you symptoms, we try to go to them and release them from the roles they've been forced into. Just like in a family, when a family gets traumatized, some kids become parentified children, as you know, and are forced into roles they're not equipped to handle and become rigid and extreme. And other kids become kind of neglected.
That's a great analogy, and I really deeply appreciate your perspective in teaching on. It's so compassionate, and so often people that suffer from trauma, they get kind of labeled as damaged, or their behaviors are seen in a non-compassionate way, or like they're high maintenance or whatever. And what I love so much about internal family systems that you've created is that it honors and respects every aspect of what someone's doing and understands, eventually helps us learn how to understand what's motivating that behavior or how to give hope. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. So I do believe that that's been very useful to a lot of people to not think of themselves as so pathological. Because, for example, if I'm working with somebody and they dissociate, I don't think, oh my God, they dissociated. I think, okay, there's a protector that's come in to take them out right now because it's scared because they got too close to some emotion that they think the part thinks that they can't handle. I'll talk to that protector. So I'll say, could I talk to the one who just took you out? And almost every time the part will talk to me and will tell me exactly why it did it and what it was afraid would happen if it didn't. And we negotiate, and I'll, I have to address its fears, and then boom, my client's grounded again. So, and we could look at virtually every process that traumatized clients have in the same way, whether it's panic attacks or some of these what I call exile parts taking over suddenly, and if I can just talk to them in a calm way and soothe them and let them know they'll get more attention if they don't totally take over, then my client's grounded again, and on, flashbacks and all the symptomatology that's associated with trauma can be treated this way.
So you're a master relationship builder with each of these parts.
That's the idea, is to help clients build a new relationship and not fight with them or not be afraid of them, and instead learn to understand them and know that they're still stuck in the traumas. They still live as if the traumas are still happening or about to happen. And most of these protective parts think that you're still a little kid. They don't really know that you've grown up even. So a lot of the work is just helping them be updated, and also helping the client, rather than fear or attack them, listen to them and learn about how they're trying to protect and reassure them and comfort them, almost like an inner parent. So this is what I call attachment theory taken inside. So rather than helping people become attached to me as the therapist, as the good attachment figure, I'm helping people attach to what I call their self, which turns out, in addition to these parts, is in everybody and is just beneath the surface of these extreme parts. And when that self emerges, it has a wisdom about how to heal these parts. So
this sort of higher awareness self, like self with a capital S, right? That's right. This kind of consciousness or this awareness, whatever you would say, that is kind of seeing the whole thing and also helping the client intrapsychically build a more secure attachment with each part of it, of our multiplicity of selves, right?
Exactly, yeah. So I see this as my biggest discovery, that even in people that have had horrific trauma, who've been tortured on a daily basis by their parents or so and so, as their parts trust it's safe to open enough space inside, this self will emerge spontaneously and can't be damaged, and has a wisdom about how to relate in a healing way, both internally and externally. And is we call the qualities the 8 C's of self-leadership. So suddenly the client will, rather than being terrified of a part, will say, I'm just kind of curious about why it's doing this. Or they were really scared of it and now they're confident relative to it. Or they hated it and now they have some compassion for it when self emerges. So there are these C words that we identify, the qualities of self. Let's see, those are 3. So then
compassion
I mentioned, and curiosity and calm and confidence.
Courage, perhaps.
Courage, exactly. Yeah, you can help me out.
I'm just thinking of all the positive C words.
Clarity, creativity, and connectedness.
Beautiful.
So those are
words to live by, aren't they?
Yeah. And it's almost like, as you were saying, it's almost like the same person emerges in once parts open enough space in different clients.
So we're designed to heal inherently. And I think that's really wonderful, good news that as therapists, we can communicate to our clients, and it's very reassuring.
Yeah. Not only communicate, but have them experience it.
Exactly.
What I stumbled onto was a way to help people access that place pretty quickly, even with terrible histories. And while in that place, they have this wisdom about how to heal themselves.
And they experience, it's something you said before, I just wanted to underline for everybody listening. They experience this invincibility that regardless of how much horrible things might have happened, whether it's from surgery or car accidents or abuse or torture or whatever it is, that there is this inherently healed, not touched by it part of them that can hold it and help the healing, but they also can access this, I don't know what to call it, this larger self in a way that just even knowing it's there is incredibly empowering.
Exactly. Because most trauma survivors are very identified with either the parts of them that are very hurt or with the parts of them that are very protective. And as a result, they don't feel good about themselves because...
Well, those parts make so much noise in the beginning, right? Until they have the support of what you're talking about.
Yeah, they have no awareness that this other person, the self, is in there.
So they feel abandoned and betrayed and isolated and unhelpable in a way, helpless, powerless.
Just that shift in identity, as you're talking about, away from the parts that carry all this shame, for example, or carry all this terror or sense of betrayal, to this healthy core self is a big intervention.
And that's a huge difference than the escape of no escape, like going to dissociation where they're kind of tranced out. This is something where they're actually feeling the power and the possibility and the reality of being able to heal. This already healed part, even before all the parts have their chance to do what needs to happen, right?
That's right, yeah.
And having that as a resource, what could be a bigger resource?
Yeah, and it makes it a lot easier for the therapist because you don't become that good attachment figure, in which case you get all the transference and all the, you become the kind of manager of the client's system.
Like the client's developing all these connections to all these selves, all these parts, but also getting more and more access to this higher self. And even if they lose contact when they get absorbed into a part, either protecting or the wounded part, I imagine just even knowing, even if in that moment they're not connected to the higher self, they know, and they're having a growing experience of it over time, that at least they know it's there, even if they aren't in touch with it in that exact moment. It still gives them a frame of reference that I would imagine is incredibly hopeful and powerful.
Exactly. Yeah. If you have what we call a part attack, where
that's great. I love that.
Over, it's some place in there. In the past, you would panic because it just feels like it's the end of the world. But somewhere in there, it's temporary. It's a part attack, and it'll pass, and you will come back to this other place.
You've gone through it before, and that even though the therapist can remind the client, you've been through these things before, and this will happen too. We'll get there.
Yeah. And in addition to all of what we're talking about, over time, we've learned how to actually help these parts transform and leave their extreme roles and become who they're actually designed to be, which, took a while. It took a lot of trial and error to figure that out. But it turns out that what I call exiles, which are the parts that we tend to lock up because they carry a lot of the feelings, sensations, emotions, and beliefs from the traumas. And we don't even know their parts. We just think those are the feelings, sensations, emotions, and beliefs. So we try to lock them away inside in inner basements or caverns or abysses, not knowing we're locking up these inner children who, before they were hurt, were our most precious qualities often. So most all trauma survivors and most all of us in general have a lot of exiles. And when you have a lot of exiles, you have to have a lot of big time protective parts, because the world becomes a lot more delicate or fragile. You feel a lot more fragile because something could trigger you at any moment. And if your exiles get triggered, they can break out of exile and overwhelm you with all the feelings that they carry and pull you back into those trauma seeds. So most trauma survivors walk around in this very fragile state, worried constantly about being triggered for good reason, because when an exile takes over, it's not pleasant and sometimes it can be disabling.
So sometimes I would imagine that like they're narrowing their life, trying to avoid triggers or feeling controlled by triggers or trying not to have their friends or their family or their partners triggers, and then it just becomes really complicated on so many levels.
Exactly. So other parts become the narrowers of their life. These, what we call managers, are trying to manage their client's life so that nothing ever triggers the exiles. And so the exiles stay contained. And they'll try to manage your relationships so no one gets too close, or people you depend on don't get too distant, or they'll manage your appearance so that people like you and manage your performance so you get accolades and don't fail ever, become perfectionistic. And these often are what are commonly called the inner critics, because they're desperate to keep you in this narrow range. And anytime you stray, they're going to attack you to try and get you to behave. And they'll use your parents' voice because you responded when your parents yelled at you. They don't know any better. So, and they get a bad name in our field, but they're actually just little parentified children inside, trying their best to keep you safe. And then we all also have parts that are hypervigilant, as you know, and these are all common manager roles for trauma survivors. Parts that take care of everybody and don't let them take care of themselves. These would all be parts that are just trying to preempt anything that might trigger this big explosion of emotion from the exiles. But the world has a way of triggering us anyway. And when that happens, like we're saying, it's a big emergency. Something has to get you away from that right now. So there's another set of parts whose job it is to take you higher than the flames of emotion that are coming out of the exile's place, or distract you from them, or until they burn themselves out, or douse them with some substance. So
that would be like a way addiction would come into the picture.
Yeah, a lot of addictions are based on what
dysfunctional behaviors or
exactly.
ways to try to self-medicate or self-soothe that because of the emotional overwhelm. And so how do you work with the emotional overwhelm?
Well, okay, so that's a good question. So, I used to get very worried about it because clients would decompensate when it would happen. And, I learned the grounding skills and all that stuff, or affect regulation skills. And then I decided, because these parts really do seem to have a lot of agency, to just try to negotiate with them. And it turns out that if a client becomes overwhelmed, like has a panic attack, let's say, and I say, let me talk to the part that's so terrified, then I'll talk to it in a comforting, soothing way, and let it know, I get that you're stuck in a terrifying place and you desperately want help, and I'm really glad you're here because we can help you now. And it would help us help you if you wouldn't mind pulling your energy out of her a little bit so she can be with you rather than be totally blended with you, be overwhelmed by you. Would you be willing to pull your energy out of her just a little bit? And boom, the client's grounded again, and now they see the part rather than being the part.
Rather than being merged.
Being merged or blended in our language. And now they can start to comfort it themselves rather than be in it so much. So I see that as also a big discovery that I keep trying to bring to the trauma field, because the alternative when the client has a panic attack of doing the grounding can inadvertently give the message to that terrified little child part that it needs to go away. It doesn't belong here. And, that's the opposite of what you want to do.
And in this way, you're really helping them be more empowered, right? That they don't have to succumb completely to a panic attack or to another extreme behavior, that there's a way they can honor that. And at the same time, I don't know if the word disidentify, they can get a little space from it. They can unblend a bit. And it really helps them have more objectivity and more capacity to facilitate that intrapsychic healing that you've been addressing.
Yeah, but to do that, as we're saying, they have to know it's not a panic attack.
Right.
Not dissociation. It's a part coming
It's
in.
a part attack.
Yeah, it's a part attack. And if you think of it that way, then even when it's happening to you, you're going to say to yourself, okay, how can I get that part to separate so I can comfort it myself? And clients can do this on their own, turns out, which is, as you say, quite empowering.
What do you consider some of the common symptoms in treating trauma? I was kind of talking about part attacks, but is there something else you'd like to mention?
Oh, is there something else I'd like to mention?
Yeah.
Well, we talked about flashbacks, for example.
Right.
Which, from my point of view, are often these exiles lobbing these sort of memory grenades out, saying, we're in here, come deal with us. And if you ask them to not do that, with the reassurance that we're going to come and get you, you don't have to do this thing, often the flashbacks go away.
Beautiful.
So there's, all the other common, suicidal parts and rage and all the common symptoms are the activities of parts. So if a client's highly suicidal, for example, I'm not going to have them sign some contract saying they're not going to kill themselves, because that, again, just antagonizes the part. But I'll talk to it, often in what we call direct access. I'll say, Diane, can I talk to this suicidal part of you directly? Actually, we could role play it for a second, if you don't mind.
Okay.
All right. So Diane, could I talk to this part that keeps saying you should kill yourself directly for a second?
I don't have that intention, but I'll role play. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, we can talk about that. Yes.
Okay. So are you there?
Yes.
And you're the part of Diane that keeps telling her to kill herself. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So why do you do that? Why do you want her to kill herself?
I just feel hopeless. I feel like this is just going to go on forever, and it almost makes it feel like it's not worth living.
Yeah. So you mean the suffering will go on forever?
The suffering, yeah. I feel like it's constantly undermining my relationships, and I end up having these explosions, and I can't control them, and it scares my kids and scares my husband, and frankly scares me.
Yeah. All right. So I hear two things in that. One is the suffering, the pain, but also the explosions that you're trying to get Diane away from. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. And sometimes I'm driving on the highway and I just feel like, why not just drive off the edge of the road?
Yeah, that's right. So I can understand. I get how distressing those things are and why you would want to take her out that way. I totally get that. But
makes me feel sad too.
Yeah. If we could handle those things in a different way so that she wouldn't keep suffering this way and the explosions wouldn't keep happening, would you have to kill her?
No.
Okay. And if you didn't have to kill her, is there something else you'd rather do inside of her if you were freed up?
Well, let's see. I guess I'd like to engage in life more, because right now I'm just afraid of a lot of things.
Yes, it's almost the opposite of what you've been doing. Take her away from life. You'd like to help her engage more in life.
Yeah, as long as it's not so scary.
Yeah. So if you give us permission, we can go to the explosive part and we can go to the parts that it protects that are suffering.
Okay.
We can heal all that so that you won't have to kill her and you can actually help her engage in life. Would you give us permission to do that?
Yeah, it sounds almost too good to be true, but sounds wonderful.
Yeah, and I'm not expecting you to change until you see proof that it is true.
Yeah.
So I'm not pressuring you to stop trying to kill her or anything. I just want to tell you that I guarantee we can do all that.
Okay.
Okay? So let me talk to Diane again.
Okay.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Thanks for being a good sport. So
Yeah.
yes, that would be how we would work with, for example, the suicidal part. And then you got to follow through. You have to go to the rage.
Right.
And then you have to go to the pain that drives the rage and heal those parts. And
so if we were, I know we were talking earlier about emotional overwhelm, and I don't want to give the audience of therapists that aren't familiar with your work the idea that you don't deal with emotion. Obviously, emotions are parts as well. So maybe we could say a little bit more about how you might interface with rage or, deep depression or whatever you would like to give an example on.
Yeah. So the next step with this client you were portraying would be to go to the rage. And I might talk to it directly, or I might have you focus on it.
Okay.
You want to get the role play going?
We can role play that if you want.
Yeah, sure. Okay, Diane. So, we got permission from that suicidal part to go to your rage that explodes so much. Are you up for that? Just to get to know it a little bit?
Does it mean I have to feel it, or is it just something we're going to talk about?
It's not going to take over. We're just going to get to know it and help it.
Okay.
Maybe not be so rageful.
Okay.
All right. So focus on it in your body, around your body, and tell me where you find it.
Let's see. Kind of in my chest and arms.
Yeah. And as you notice it there, how do you feel toward it?
Well, this is mental probably, but I feel like I want to control it or stop it or make it not do it.
Of course. And that's what you've been trying to do. You've spent a lot of energy trying to contain it, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I totally understand why, because it's done damage in the past. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when it's taken over. So I could understand that, but we're going to ask the parts that work so hard to contain it to just give us a little space to get to know it and maybe help it not do this rageful thing.
Okay.
And we're not going to give it more power to take over by doing this. We're just going to help it, just like we did with the suicidal part. We're just going to help get to know it and maybe help it relax a little bit.
Okay.
So see if the parts that work so hard to control it and have a lot of fear of it would give us some space for a second.
Yeah, I think there's space.
All right.
They're curious.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so focus on it again, the rage in your arms and hands, and tell me how you feel toward it now.
More open, actually. More curious.
So let it know that. Let it know you're not trying to control it right now. You just want to get to know it.
Okay.
And just ask it what it wants you to know about itself. And just wait for the answer to come. Don't think of the answer.
It wants to be seen and heard, and it feels like it has to be extreme for that to happen. Like otherwise it's ignored and neglected.
That's right. Does that make sense to you, Diane?
Mm-hmm.
So let it know. You get that.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. It feels like if it doesn't explode, you're just going to ignore it. And other people will too. So how does it react to being understood this way?
Well, even in this experience right now, it feels like it's being seen and heard.
Yeah.
Calmly.
Okay. So what's that like for it? Just ask it.
It feels almost like I can drop down into my stomach, and it's relaxed, a little more relaxed instead of so constricted and tight. And yeah, so there's relief.
Yeah. So ask it, if you could do this, where you listen to it, you see it, you hear it, rather than trying to lock it up and control it more consistently, would it have to get so extreme?
Right now, it feels like it's easier to feel that reassurance coming from you, but it's a little bit of a shift for me to think about it coming from me.
Yeah,
So,
that's okay.
yeah, there's a little bit of an idea that I can't handle it, but
Yeah.
someone like you could handle it. But so I'm looking to sit with that for a minute.
Is that coming from a different part, or is it coming from the rage itself?
That's a little hard for me to tell. Let me just hang out with that a minute.
Yeah, just check.
I think it's coming from a part that's worried about being overwhelmed and
Right.
then moving back into what you're calling blending,
Right. Okay, so let that part know that you get it's not quite ready for this to become a practice. That it needs to trust more that this rage won't overwhelm you if you try to go to it on your own.
Okay.
But ask it again to step back for now anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can do that.
And go back to the rage. Tell me when you see it again or you sense it.
Okay.
And ask it if it's willing to not overwhelm the way it has in the past when you come to it in this curious way and compassionate way. It's willing to not totally take over so you can see it better.
Yeah, I think that's true because it's mainly needing to be seen and understood. Yeah.
And it's these other parts that haven't allowed that. So if it does feel like you can do that, then it doesn't have to, like it said, it doesn't have to get extreme.
Right.
Okay, so this is the negotiation that's going to have to continue between the parts that don't quite trust that yet.
Right. I'm thinking of a client who used to slam so many doors in her house when she'd be triggered by her husband that she broke all the hinges, cracked all the doorways. So I'm just thinking about her story, and yeah, I think this would work.
Yeah, and then we would find out more about what the rage protects, and the rage would just, I would have you ask the rage what other parts it protects, and usually it's some exiles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for her, it's extreme vulnerability and then being hurt in that state. I remember.
Yeah, exactly. And so we would negotiate permission from it to go to those parts. And
you're kind of peeling the onion to deeper and deeper wounds and helping that healing happen. And then the behaviors aren't needed. You're just kind of giving them their pink slip in a way. I mean, just you're honoring them, but they can maybe eventually transform, like you said, into maybe a curious perspective or something else.
And they're worried about the pink slip. So you have to reassure them there's a new role waiting for you.
Right, exactly, that they have a new way to express.
But so this process, you've done a great job of role-playing, working with a couple protectors, first the suicide, then the rage, to get permission to the vulnerability, to go to the vulnerability. So we don't go to these vulnerable parts until we get that permission overtly from these protectors. I learned that the hard way, because if you do go too fast to exiles, there'll be what we call a backlash from protectors.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Kind of the boomerang effect. You get in trouble. And it's just not doing the right pacing and dosing, and also getting that. I think that your terminology of getting the permission, it sort of reminds me of that old TV show of Maxwell Smart where there were all the doors. You kind of had to get through to get where you were going, and to respect that process and not go straight to the wound. It's maybe too vulnerable.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I learned the hard way to do it that way. And I'm heartened to see that, for example, the EMDR community now is advocating learning some IFS. EMDRIA is learning some IFS so that you can get permission before you do this.
Right. Oh, exactly.
This has the power to bypass protectors and go to exiles.
That's a really important step for EMDR to move into getting the permission before doing the bilateral. That's beautiful. I'm just repeating it to make sure that everybody hears that piece.
Yeah, good. So then what do you do once you get to an exile? So if we were to continue the role play and we got permission from the rage and you started to focus on the pain that it was protecting, you might see yourself as a little girl.
Mm-hmm.
And I would ask how you felt toward that part. And we would work until you had some compassion for her, which meant getting other parts to step back often.
Right.
And then I would have you show her that you care about her, get close to her, maybe hold her. A lot of times people just do that spontaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And so
once the compassion's in place.
Exactly, that's right. And so you would do that until she really trusted that you cared about her. And sometimes that takes a while because these parts are furious that you abandoned them and locked them up.
And often they're going ways back in terms of age, so they've been hanging out in that space for a long time.
Exactly. So we do that until the part does trust that you care, at which point it turns out that these parts need a couple things before they're willing to unload the feelings and beliefs they've been carrying, what we call the burdens they've been carrying from the traumas. So they need first for you to get what happened to them when they got these feelings and beliefs initially and how bad it was.
So they really need you to attune to really get it, feel gotten, feel felt.
So I would have you ask the girl to show you what she needs you to know about what happened and how bad it was in the past. And people spontaneously start to see scenes and feel emotions and sensations. And we do that until the part feels fully witnessed. Until it says, okay, now you get it. Now you get how bad it was.
It just shows how deeply ingrained it is to need attunement. That being seen, being heard, being understood,
that's right.
being met.
It's like you write about in your new book.
Yeah, that's true. It's a big focus of the book, the power of attachment.
Power of attachment and this internal attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And so we stay there until the part feels witnessed, but then it usually is still frozen in that time period, in that scene. Or it may not be a single scene, it may be a whole time period. So then I would say to you, Diane, I want you to go into that place, that scene.
My adult self.
Adult, just what I call...
Or my age now, is that what you mean?
No, just the self.
Oh, okay.
So I would so you wouldn't see yourself go in there.
I see.
In other words, you would just be there.
I see.
You would see the girl, but you would be there as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I would ask you to do what felt right with her back in that scene, be there in the way she needed.
To have those needs met.
Exactly. You would be that good attachment figure for her.
Right.
Back there. And she might ask you to go yell at your mother or push away the abuser or whatever. And you would do that for her while she watched.
Okay.
You would see that you can take care of her.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, she'd be ready to leave that time and place. And so you would take her to a safe, comfortable place. Could be in the present, could be a fantasy place. And once she's there and she trusts she doesn't have to go back to that place and that you're going to take care of her, she'll be ready to unload these emotions and beliefs, these burdens she's been carrying even for 40 years that have been driving all these other protectors. And so we have a kind of ritualized way to do that, which involved the elements. What does she want to give all this stuff up to? And parts can tell you exactly what these burdens are and where they carry them in their bodies or on their bodies.
Right.
And they send it out to the light, and suddenly, immediately, she's a happy little girl, wants to go play.
Yeah, I've had people send it to the bottom of the ocean, send it out into the universe. Okay. So far they can't even see it or remember it. So I think you can access that wisdom.
Yeah, whatever the part wants, we just go ahead and do that. And now it's transformed. It's different. It's not a hurting little being. It's a delightful little girl who wants to play.
Mm-hmm.
And so we set that up for her and invite qualities back into her body that she might need. And then we bring in all these protectors, the rage and the suicide, to see that they don't have to protect her anymore. And what do they want to do now? And sometimes they're ready. They just want to do their new job, like the suicidal part wants to get you out in life more. Sometimes they're not ready because there are still other exiles they've been protecting that we have to do other sessions to heal.
Yeah, different parts can be fueling different behaviors and different feelings and different wounds, and there's a lot to make, just kind of to make sure that you're accessing and addressing.
That's right. Yeah, so that's the process, and psychotherapy has most commonly been compared to an onion in terms of vegetables. In this model, it's more like a clove of garlic, where you have all these different systems that are not totally connected to each other. So you clear out one, like we just did, and that's great, and the client feels a lot better. But you didn't touch a bunch of others that have exiles and protectors too, that you have to go back in and dig around in also.
So it could be quite a complex and ongoing process. And I would imagine, just talking about what sometimes is referred to as DID or dissociative identity disorder, we would be looking at that as parts, and what some people call alters would be reframed as parts, and you'd understand more of the way it's organized for the person in terms of different parts and different roles.
Yeah, alters are parts. So parts are really no different than what are called alters, except that people with DID, because of the horrific chronic trauma they suffered, their system got blown apart more.
Mm-hmm.
So they stand out in bolder relief, and they are more polarized with each other. And they don't have any trust in self, usually. So the parts, one after the other, are kind of running the client's life.
I worked with a client long ago, beautiful woman, and when her what you would call I'm going to say higher self, but wouldn't you call the self with the capital S, the overview, she loved to play basketball. And whenever that came in from when she was moving into kind of a more compassionate or healing aspect, when she was working with what we would call alters back then, she would hear like the swoosh of a ball going through the basketball hoop, without hitting the rim. She just hear internally this whoosh, and then she knew it was like a auditory sound that she heard internally, where she knew she had access to the self, that she could then access more and more as we healed different wounds and worked with different elements. And so I just thought that was an interesting way she accessed it.
Yeah, I still play basketball at my age, and I love that sound.
Yeah, she does too. She goes, "Oh, that whoosh just happened." And I'm like, "Great!" It was like a marker. It became a real resource in therapy for us to, know that was there, and then we could then revisit different words. Like you said, she had an incredibly unbelievable amount of trauma that had gotten this extreme polarization, but she worked through it so beautifully. I mean, so I just want to encourage our listeners that there is so much powerful possibilities when we are honoring what you're suggesting today.
That's great. Yeah, so that's a lot of what we try to bring to the trauma field and to trauma survivors. And as you're saying, people with what's called developmental trauma, who wasn't one incident, it was every
maybe
day.
Ongoing neglect or
neglect. Yeah, it does take a while. It's not something that you can fix in a couple sessions.
Are there any examples of working with clients? I mean, obviously without saying their name and maybe changing some of the details for confidentiality, is there any kind of examples you'd like to share?
Oh, there's a million. Let me just think for a second. Yeah, so this would be sort of similar to the client you played, but I've worked with a lot of clients who carry the label borderline personality disorder, for example.
Mm.
And one recently who had been through many therapists who just burned out on her. because she had that typical pattern of both very sort of seductively, and not seductively in a sexual way, but very charmingly trying to cross the boundaries of the therapist, so that the therapist, in my case, so that I would give her extra sessions, and I would, she could call me anytime, and I'm generally pretty loose about that. But she had exiles that desperately wanted me to be the self to their system, to be the parent.
Right.
And then she had what I'll call a recruiting protector, a recruiter manager, whose job it is to suck me in, to get me to be that for her. The catch was, and this is what happened to the other therapists, that as soon as that recruiter part succeeded to some degree and started getting her to be closer to me, more attached to me, there was this big bouncer protector who would come in and blast me, and had been studying my every flaw for weeks and knew just the right trigger points for me.
This hypersensitivity and attention to that, yeah,
but also rage, just
right, in a very rageful
something that I did and blow it into this big outrage, and out of the blue would blast me that way. And so part of the reason I could succeed with her where other therapists had failed was because I didn't see that as borderline personality disorder.
You saw it as a part.
I saw it as here's the recruiter part doing its thing. Now, when is that bouncer part going to show up? Because it's bound to show up as soon as she starts to depend on me very much. And so when it showed up, I said, okay, here's the bouncer part. It's going to do this to me, and it would do it to anybody. It's sort of like the mafia. It's business. It's not personal.
Right. And it's patterned. It's in the pattern. So It's going to show up.
So I didn't overreact. I didn't take it personally, and I could stay in self myself. And I could say, I see that you're scared that are getting too close, and let's talk about that. Or that she's getting too dependent on me. Let's talk about that. And I get that in the past you've had to do this to people to scare them away because you're so scared that you'll get hurt. And if I can stay like that and talk to it again through direct access, then it calms down in the way that your rage calmed down when it felt seen. And then ultimately we can get to the exiles that drive all of that and have her be the caretaker of those exiles so that the recruiter part can retire because it trusts that it doesn't have to find this person in the outside to take care of these parts that it doesn't know what to do with. It can trust her to do that. And that took a while. With clients, most of the clients I worked with that carried that borderline diagnosis were severe sex abuse survivors, and it just takes time.
Yeah, it takes time. And I really wanted to highlight what you said about therapists and yourself. You were referring to yourself about staying in self. You as the facilitator, you were staying in self. And even with this razor blade kind of rage, you could stay in self and keep your seat. And how powerful that is to someone that's struggling with that amount of anger, right? That it doesn't move you off your center. Yes. They say in Buddhism, keeping your seat, in self. And I think that's so valuable. And I also, I'm sure that people, as they're listening to this, unless they're already trained in internal family system, might be recognizing it's really important to get the training because it's complex. Yeah. And there's different pieces to address, and there's different strategies, and there's different needs that you've been kind of alluding to. And I know in the bonuses that you're providing, it'll highlight more, but I would encourage people to have the training to go along with this that you provide internationally. That's such a blessing to the field. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that. And maybe you could say a little bit about your journey into learning how to stay in self higher self or this self that gives you this capacity to be compassionate and have a sort of equanimity with whatever arises in a session, even when it's what we would consider usually difficult.
Yeah, well, it's been a long road, and it's still happening. I'm still working on it, but I have to give most of the credit to my clients, like her, who taught me the parts of me that get triggered by things like that. And what I'll take credit for is, instead of calling them, oh, she's sicker than I thought, she's a really serious borderline.
I know, because especially with a borderline diagnosis, people get trashed in our field. It's so disrespectful.
It's so tempting to blame the client. But if instead you let the client be what I'll call your tormentor, with a hyphen between the tor and the mentor.
Oh, I love that.
By tormenting you, they're mentoring you about what you have to heal. And, I actually wound up doing that. And so, and still do. So when a client really triggers me, first of all, I'll own it. I'll say, what you said really triggered a part of me. I'm going to have to work with that. I'll work with that between sessions so it doesn't keep getting in the way.
So you take responsibility instead of reacting and blaming the client.
Exactly. And then I'll do that work. I still have somebody I trade sessions with. So I'll go to her and I'll say, I felt this part come up in our last session with this client. Let me get to know it. Let me see why it took the bait and why it got so triggered. And I'll do a piece of work with it. And now, boom, same trigger doesn't get me anymore. And so I'm a very different person, a very different therapist, and much more able to stay in self because I let my clients be my tormentors. And that's what we're encouraging everybody to do. Let your clients help you learn what you have to heal.
Because it's a big job being a therapist. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to continue doing your own work, digging into your own history, and allowing yourself to have these reactions and own them, and then actually not just have the reaction, but like you said, for yourself, go out and get the work yourself. Do the work yourself. And I think that's we are in a field that really, I'm a big believer in working on oneself. I sometimes I think it's an accident who's in the therapy chair and who's in the client chair, but I really feel it's so important that we're in the client chair a lot to work, to be compassionate with our own self and to learn and expand our capacity to have the benefit of being in self, the higher self so much.
Especially if you're going to work with trauma, because as, for example, you help your client go to their exiles and they become very vulnerable and sad or scared or ashamed, it's going to start to trigger your own.
Of course.
And if you're afraid of your own, then you're going to be afraid of your clients too.
And you can inadvertently change the subject or disconnect yourself or steer the session in a different way and not even be realizing that your parts are doing that, because I had that actually. I had a therapist many years ago that was pretty good as a therapist, but when I started to go into some of my trauma history, they would get really angry and they would never let me go there. They would just always change the subject or be a little attacking. I think that went on for like 3 or 4 years, and I finally realized I can't work with this person, so that was my bad example file of my own experience. And I'm sure we've all had that happen until we are aware of what our own reactions are doing. And we need to have compassion for ourselves as therapists, because you're not just doing your history and your work. You are, but you're also having a lot of other people's information and experiences and wounds almost like come into your field in a way that you could be, triggered easily with whatever's unresolved in your history. So I think having somebody that you really rely on and you really trust, that you can, like you do, Dick, that I think is so fabulous, is to trade sessions with, or you have your own therapist. I just think it's almost a requirement. A compassionate requirement for us to be effective and to really help alleviate suffering. And I know that's what everybody listening wants to be doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the ability to stay in self, regardless of what model you're using, if you do attachment work or other kinds of work, EMDR or whatever you're doing, the ability for you to stay in self is probably the biggest healing agent, actually.
I think that's the biggest healing agent for the human journey, isn't it? We're talking about the meta level and really an assignment I think we all have as human beings, whether we pursue it or not. I wanted to highlight something, because with IFS and attachment, one of the things I think is so fascinating is when you're facilitating the parts, even though you're inviting the intrapsychic healing, which is there, right, that the person can then be more compassionate with these different parts, or they can do these different functions you've been alluding to. There is this, I'm sure, appreciation of the facilitator getting it and knowing how to direct traffic a little bit, and you are maintaining this self, staying grounded in that for most of the time. I think that's also having a really big impact on why the person's healing, right? To have the presence of a caring, attentive, attuned, someone who takes responsibility when they get triggered. That's kind of a modeling also that's happening when in the relational field, or when a person's sitting with you, and then you're redirecting it so that they learn to do it themselves. It's like takes one to know one or something. You're teaching in your presence. And how you meet these parts, that I think also is a big invitation and learning for the client to import that into their intrapsychic world, where they're showing compassion and acceptance, and giving hope and reassigning roles, and giving opportunities to parts to shift and transform. Do you agree with what I'm saying?
I totally agree. Yeah, I wrote a chapter on that very thing.
Oh, well, I think it's really a powerful part of it,
Yeah, basically, you just covered that whole chapter.
Oh, well, gee.
But I very much agree with you. And, that's been an evolution for me, too, because in the beginning, I wanted to downplay my relationship with clients and really put it all on self. And I had my own, I think, mishigas reasons for that. But over time, I became more and more aware, and students helped me become more and more aware of the tremendous importance of my relationship with the client too. And for all those attachment reasons that you're talking about, that my attunement, my modeling, my compassion, all gets taken in by all these parts, and they relax more and more, and they allow more self to come forward. And
you've been modeling that, presencing what I would call secure attachment. You've been modeling that throughout the call, like how you interface, your tone of voice, the questions you were asking when we were role playing, and other examples you gave through the call. I think that you are really a master at that. So I want to highlight that, not to under highlight the importance of us learning to do that internally, but I think it's really beautiful. So I just wanted to
thank you for
share that with you.
The compliment, and I think you're pioneering in bringing that importance of that kind of presence to our field. So it's a really nice fit that way.
Thanks, Dick. That was a fantastic presentation. I really enjoyed our conversation, and it's always a delight to be with you. I know we bump into you at conferences all the time, and I get to see you in that kind of context, and it's nice to have this format as well. If you want to learn more about Dick and his work, please go to his webpage at centerforselfleadership.com. He also has a great conference coming up in Denver, September 26, 27, and 28. So if you're nearby, you want to pop into that. I'm going to try to make it myself. We want to thank you, Dick, again for coming and sharing your wealth of wisdom with us, all of us, and with such practical perspectives that we can really use in almost any kind of therapy setting. So I'm so happy that your internal family systems model continues to enrich and transform lives. And again, I just want to mention to those of you on the call that are interested in upgrading, let me share a little bit about Richard's 2 bonuses he's going to be adding to our wealth of bonuses from all the presenters. First, he has a bonus, which is a chapter from the book, You Are the One You've Been Waiting For. I love that title. And this chapter title is called Cultural Constraints to intimacy. Very important point. And then he's also giving us an audio tape of a special meditation called Speaking to a Part. And this is something you can go through yourself and also provide for your clients. I think it's a really exciting bonus. Thank you so much, Dick. And that's a digital download, so you can see how to start working with the internal family systems model. When you upgrade, you get all the talks, all the transcripts, all the audios, all the videos, the 16 bonuses from the presenters, and my 2 bonuses, so that for $197. So I invite you to get it now during the summit and to save $200, and just click the link or click the button, and it'll take you right to more information or anything else you might need about it. We do have a payment plan if that makes it easier for you. And again, Dick, I want to thank you for your presentation. Thanks to everyone who's joined us today. I know your busy schedules and took the time out. I really appreciate it. And we're going to be making this presentation available for 12 hours, so you can come and listen to it in the next 12 hours all around the world. So we hit every time zone. And remember to lock in your savings and get lifetime access to the Healing Trauma Upgrade Package. Make sure to join us on our next call, which is tomorrow, with Dr. Ron Siegel, who's also one of my favorite speakers, and I bump into him at conferences all the time. I'm so lucky to have that opportunity. And he's going to be speaking on mindfulness in trauma treatment, which is very helpful, again, across many contexts, and kind of how to distinguish when you use it and when you might modify it or work with a different kind of approach. It's mindfulness in the trauma treatment, fitting the practice to the person, which I think is a perfect title. I look forward to seeing you on the next training call, and thanks again for being here today.